Imagine a city, once the vibrant heart of a nation, suddenly sliced in two. Not by a river, not by a mountain, but by a wall. A wall that would divide families, friends, and a whole world for nearly 3 decades. This is the story of the Berlin Wall, a stark symbol of the Cold War. After World War II, Germany was defeated and divided. The Allied powers, the United States, Britain, and France, took control of the western part, while the Soviet Union controlled the east. Berlin, the capital, though deep inside Soviet territory, was also split 4 ways. This created a strange situation, a small island of Western democracy and capitalism floating in a sea of Eastern communism. Life in West Berlin was starkly different from life in the East. The West, backed by its allies, was rebuilding rapidly. Shops were full, freedoms were plenty, and opportunities seemed endless. In contrast, East Germany, under Soviet influence, faced economic hardship and strict political control. The state owned everything, and the secret police, the Stasi, watched everyone. It's no surprise that many East Germans looked to the West with longing. Between 1949 and 1961, an estimated 2.5 million people fled East Germany, most of them through the open border in Berlin. This was a massive brain drain. Doctors, engineers, teachers, and skilled workers were leaving in droves, and the East German economy was on the brink of collapse. The government knew it had to do something to stop the exodus. And, in the dead of night, on August 13, 1961, the unthinkable happened. East German soldiers and workers began to tear up streets and erect barbed wire fences through the heart of Berlin. Trams stopped in their tracks, families were separated, and by morning, the border was sealed. What started as a flimsy barrier of wire and concrete posts would soon become a formidable structure. Over the years, this initial barrier evolved into the Berlin Wall we often picture. It wasn't just one wall, but 2, separated by a deadly death strip. This no man's land was filled with sand and gravel to show footprints, floodlights, guard towers with machine guns, and even landmines. The official name given by the East German government was the Anti-Fascist Protection Rampart, claiming it was to keep Western spies out. But everyone knew its real purpose was to keep its own citizens in. Life in a divided Berlin was surreal. People on one side could literally wave to relatives on the other, but they couldn't touch, couldn't visit. Some tried desperate measures to escape. They dug tunnels, hid in cars, flew homemade hot air balloons, or tried to swim across the canals. The stories of these escapes are tales of incredible bravery and ingenuity, but many were not so lucky. It's estimated that at least 140 people died trying to cross the wall, shot by guards or killed by the various traps. For 28 years, the wall stood as a concrete curtain, a physical manifestation of the Iron Curtain that divided Europe. For the West, it was a symbol of communist oppression. For the East, it was a daily reminder of their confinement. Yet, even behind the wall, the desire for freedom never died. Small acts of defiance grew, and the spirit of resistance simmered. The beginning of the end came in the late 1980s. The Soviet Union, under its reformist leader Mikhail Gorbachev, was weakening. His policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika restructuring sent ripples of change across Eastern Europe. Countries like Poland and Hungary began to open their borders. In the summer of 1989, thousands of East Germans vacationing in Hungary seized the opportunity and crossed into Austria, and from there to West Germany. Back in East Germany, mass protests erupted. People gathered in the streets, chanting, "Wir sind das Volk." We are the people. The pressure on the East German government was immense. They were losing control, and they knew it. Then came the night of November 9th, 1989. It was a moment of sheer, beautiful chaos, sparked by a mistake. At a press conference, a government official named Gunter Schabowski was asked about new travel regulations. He hadn't been fully briefed and mistakenly announced that East Germans were free to cross the border, effective immediately. The news spread like wildfire. At first, people were hesitant, disbelieving. Could it be true? Crowds began to gather at the checkpoints along the wall. The guards were confused. They had no orders. But the crowds grew larger and more insistent. Faced with thousands of their own citizens demanding to be let through, the overwhelmed border guards finally gave in and opened the gates. The scenes that followed were pure joy. People streamed through, laughing, crying, and hugging complete strangers. West Berliners greeted them with flowers and champagne. People climbed on top of the wall, dancing and chipping away at it with hammers and chisels. They became known as Mauerspecht, wall woodpeckers. The symbol of division had become the world's biggest party. The fall of the Berlin Wall was not just the end of a physical barrier. It was the end of an era. It signaled the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe and paved the way for German reunification less than a year later. It was a victory for freedom, for the power of ordinary people to change history. Today, if you visit Berlin, you can still see remnants of the wall. A long section stands as a memorial, covered in art, a reminder of both the division and the unity that followed. The path where the wall once stood is marked by a line of cobblestones, a scar running through the city that has long since healed. The story of the Berlin Wall is a powerful reminder of what can happen when ideologies divide us. But it's also a testament to the enduring human spirit and the unquenchable desire for freedom. It shows us that no wall, no matter how tall or how terrifying, can stand forever against the will of the people. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as moving as I did, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. See you next time.
The news traveled faster than the official orders. East Berliners who were watching West German television heard the broadcast. They didn't wait for confirmation, they put on their coats and walked to the border crossings. At the Bornholmer Strage crossing, the border guards were overwhelmed. Thousands of people gathered in the streets, chanting "Open the gate." The guards had received no instructions, their phones were ringing off the hook with contradictory commands, and the crowd was swelling by the minute. Facing a sea of humanity, realizing that the use of force would trigger a massacre and that the political will to hold the line had evaporated, the commanding officer made a split-second decision. He raised his hand and gave the signal. The barrier lifted, the floodgates opened. The scenes that followed define the after of 1989, a moment of pure, unadulterated ecstasy that cinema struggles to replicate. Thousands of people poured through the checkpoint, their faces illuminated by the lights of West Berlin, tears streaming down their cheeks. They were embraced by total strangers on the other side, West Berliners who had climbed onto the wall to welcome them. The atmosphere was electric, a chaotic, beautiful celebration of humanity. In that night, the wall ceased to be a barrier of fear and became a dance floor. People stood atop the concrete that had imprisoned them, hacking at it with hammers and chisels, taking chunks away as souvenirs, as if they were physically dismantling the nightmare of the past 40 years. The Mauerspecht, or wall woodpeckers, chipped away at the symbol of division, turning the concrete into dust and memories. The morning after revealed a new world. The psychological barrier that had dictated the lives of millions had evaporated overnight. The days immediately following November 9th were a blur of exploration. East Germans drove their smoke-belching Trabant cars into West Berlin, staring up at the skyscrapers as if they were monuments from another planet. They walked into supermarkets, dazzled by the variety of fruits and goods that had been scarce luxuries in the East. West Berliners, in turn, wandered into the East, curious to see the other half of their city. The contrast was jarring. The gray, decaying facades of the East seemed to exist in a different time dimension compared to the glossy modernity of the West, but the initial euphoria began to settle into a complex reality of reunification. The disappearance of the wall was not instant. It was a gradual process of deconstruction. Bulldozers and heavy machinery moved in to tear down the sections that had been manually dismantled by the crowds. The death strip was reclaimed by the city. The watchtowers, once the eyes of the oppression, were dismantled or turned into museums. The no man's land, once a deadly zone of gravel and alarms, began to sprout with grass. Urban planners and architects faced the monumental task of stitching the city back together. Where the wall had stood, a scar of empty land ran through the city, a void that begged to be filled. This became the focus of the after-era how to heal the wound. In the years that followed, Berlin underwent a metamorphosis. The empty spaces were transformed into new neighborhoods. Potsdamer Platz, once a desolate wasteland cut into by the wall, became a bustling center of modern architecture and commerce, symbolizing the new, unified Berlin. The line of the wall became a trail of memory and progress. Today, a double cobblestone line embedded in the streets marks the path where the barrier once stood, a subtle but powerful reminder of the division. Places like the East Side Gallery emerge, where a long remaining section of the wall was turned into an open-air gallery painted by artists from around the world, transforming an instrument of death into a canvas for freedom and expression. However, the after is not just about physical reconstruction, it is about the psychological and social merging of two populations that had lived under vastly different systems for nearly 3 decades. The fall of the wall brought the realization that the two Germanies had become strangers to one another. The Osses East Germans and Wesses, us Germans, discovered they spoke the same language, but had different cultural references, different work ethics, and different perspectives on life. There was a period of disillusionment, often referred to as the wall in the head. Even as the concrete was carted away, the mental barriers took longer to crumble. East Germans struggled with the collapse of their social structures and the rapid imposition of capitalism, while West Germans grappled with the massive financial cost of rebuilding the East. Yet, as the decades have passed since 1989, the city has found a new rhythm. The generation that grew up after the fall knows the wall only as history, a chapter in a textbook, or a story told by grandparents. They move freely through a city that is whole, where the flow of traffic and people ignores the old boundaries. The horror of the before has faded into the backdrop of a vibrant, hip, and historically rich metropolis. The visual landscape today is one of unity. The Reichstag building, once the symbol of a divided nation, now sports a modern glass dome, transparent and open, looking out over a city where the government sits once again. The transformation of the Berlin Wall from a terrifying reality to a historical artifact serves as a powerful visualization of human resilience. Before 1989, the city was a puzzle that could never be solved, a city of two-halves that did not make a whole. After 1989, it became a testament to the fact that even the most fortified barriers, when built on fear, are ultimately temporary. The story of the wall is a story of patience and inevitability. For 28 years, it seemed permanent, an eternal fixture of the Cold War landscape. And yet, in the end, it fell not under the weight of a military attack, but under the weight of the peaceful footsteps of its own people. As we visualize the Berlin Wall before and after 1989, we see a stark dichotomy. We see the gray, isolated, fearful existence of the past, contrasting sharply with the colorful, open, interconnected reality of the present. We see a city that learned the hard way that walls do not solve problems. They only imprison the people who build them. The remnants of the wall that still stand today, preserved in memorials and scattered in museums, serve a vital purpose. They force us to remember what the city looked like when it was broken. They challenge us to ensure that we never repeat the mistakes of the past. The before is a cautionary tale. The after is a promise of what is possible when courage and hope converge. Looking at the Berlin of today, with its bustling cafes, its diverse population, and its seamless blend of the historic and the hypermodern, it is difficult to imagine the terror that once reigned here. The silence of the death strip has been replaced by the noise of construction and conversation. The searchlights have been replaced by street lamps that illuminate paths for everyone, regardless of which side they were born on. The transition from the nightmare of division to the dream of unity is perhaps the most profound historical visualization of the 20th century. It reminds us that history is not just something that happens to us. It is something we create, sometimes by tearing down the things that divide us. The legacy of the wall is complex, but the lesson is clear. It stands as a monument to the failure of tyranny and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The visualization of Berlin before 1989 is a picture of a world trapped in black and white. The visualization of Berlin after is a world returned to color. As the sun sets over the Brandenburg Gate today, shining through the pillars that once stood isolated behind the border, it casts a single, unified shadow on the ground. The wall is gone, the city is whole, and the story continues to be written, not in concrete and barbed wire, but in the freedom of the people who walk its streets. The Berlin Wall rose in silence and fell in celebration, leaving behind a scar that has healed into a roadmap for the future.